Sam and Lina had been together for 8 years, married for 5. On paper, they had everything: good jobs, a decent apartment in the city, weekends with friends when they could manage it. But life had a way of stealing time, one deadline at a time, one responsibility after another. Sam was a consultant, always on calls, always chasing the next project. Lina worked in communications. Her phone never left her hand. Even when they were home together, they were never really with each other. Meals were eaten in silence, Sam scrolling through numbers, Lina scrolling through emails. The arguments that did come weren't about anything big. They were about the dishwasher, the laundry, the fact that one of them hadn't been listening when the other was speaking. But beneath those little sparks, something colder was setting in. There were no children. Not yet. At first, not yet had been their choice, a smile across the table, a whispered one day. But lately, not yet had turned into something heavier, a silence that filled rooms, a silence they didn't know how to break. It was a Thursday night when the silence cracked. Sam had just shut his laptop after a 14-hour day. Lina was closing her phone, her shoulders tight from hours of back-and-forth messages that had led nowhere. The argument began with something small, an unpaid bill, a forgotten errand. But by the time it burned out, they were both staring at each other like strangers forced to share the same space. "We can't keep doing this," Lina said finally. Her voice was tired, not angry. Sam rubbed his face. "What do you want me to say? That I'll quit my job? That we'll magically fix this? I want you to be here, just once. I want us to feel like us again." The silence that followed was heavier than the fight. It was Lina who found it the next day, scrolling past travel blogs and off-grid retreats. A lodge, a small family-run place tucked into the mountains, the kind of cabin with wooden beams, a stone fireplace, thick quilts folded neatly at the end of the bed. There was no Wi-Fi, no TV, just silence, broken by the sound of wind moving through the pines and the creak of old wood. "It looks perfect," Lina said, sliding her phone across the table. Sam leaned in, studying the photos, a firelit common room, a view of 2 lakes from the balcony. Side by side, twin mirrors of water in the mountains. Their names in the location description caught his eye. Strange, unfamiliar. Isli, Tislit. "The story says they were lovers," Lina explained. "From different families, forbidden to be together. They cried until their tears made lakes." Sam raised a brow. "That's dramatic." "There's more," Lina added, her eyes lingering on the text. "Some say they still rise at night, that they cross the water to find each other." He smirked, shaking his head. "Ghost lovers, great bedtime story." But he didn't protest when she booked it. A weekend off-grid, no deadlines, no messages. Just the 2 of them, a cabin in the mountains, and the lakes of Isli and Tislit. The road narrowed as it climbed, curling higher into the mountains until the air thinned and the trees grew denser. By the time they reached the lodge, the city felt like something they had only dreamed. It was smaller than the photos had suggested. 2 stories of timber and stone tucked against a ridge. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the faint smell of cedar. Behind it, the land fell away into a wide valley where the lakes stretched like twin mirrors. Dark, still, perfect. Inside, the cabin was warm. A fire burned low in the hearth, the furniture worn but comfortable. Hand-woven rugs muted the creak of the floorboards. On the wall, photographs in black and white, families, harvests, winters with snow up to the rooftops. The innkeeper greeted them with a careful smile and poured tea into heavy cups. He joined them by the fire, as though this was part of the welcome. "You've come for the lakes," he said. Not as a question, but as fact. Sam nodded. They looked different, beautiful. The man's eyes lingered on them a moment too long before he spoke again. "They are called Isli and Tislit. In our language, it means the man betrothed and the woman betrothed. Long ago, they were lovers, but their families were enemies. They were forbidden." Lina leaned in, her hands curled around the cup. "They say the 2 wept until their tears carved the lakes. When they died, their sorrow was not finished. Some nights, when the air is still and the moon is bright, they rise, lovers again, but never at peace." Sam gave a small smile, half to himself. "So that's the story behind the ghost lakes." The man didn't smile back. His voice was low. "Be careful. Love that ends in sorrow does not end." The fire cracked, sharp in the silence. For a moment, the room felt colder. After lunch, they left the lodge behind and walked the narrow trail down into the valley. The lakes revealed themselves slowly, spread wide between the ridges, their surfaces dark and still under the heavy sky. One stretched long and deep, its waters shadowed by the peaks. The other was smaller, rounder, almost delicate in its shape. Isli, Lina read from the small guidebook she carried. She pointed across the slope, where the second body of water shimmered faintly. And Tislit, always close, never together. Sam's hand brushed hers. "They don't look so far apart," he said, "but it's like the land itself kept them separated." She smiled, tucking the book away, or held them close, depending on how you see it. They spent the afternoon wandering the shoreline, their laughter carrying easily across the water. Sam crouched, squinting at a flat stone, wound his arm back like a pitcher, and sent it splashing with a single, pathetic plunk. Lina burst out laughing, the sound startling birds from the reeds. "That was tragic. You didn't even see the spin on it," Sam protested, already searching for another. She found one first, smoother, lighter. With a flick of her wrist, it skipped twice before sinking. She turned to him with a mock bow. "And that is how it's done." Sam shook his head, smiling despite himself. Beginner's luck. They kept going, side by side, their pockets full of stones until their hands were dusty and their arms sore. When they tired of competing, they wandered farther, taking turns balancing on rocks slick with moss, steadying each other with outstretched hands. More than once, one of them nearly fell in, and the other pulled them back, laughing so hard they had to stop just to catch their breath. For the first time in months, the distance between them wasn't filled with silence. It was filled with joy. By the time the sun lowered, painting the lakes in streaks of gold, they were stretched out together on a blanket. Lina's head rested against Sam's shoulder, his arm draped loosely around her. The last of the wine warmed them both, their cheeks pink from the air. Sam looked at her then, really looked at her. The softness at the corner of her mouth, the way her hair caught the last light. He felt the kind of ache he hadn't let himself feel in too long. "You know," he said, "we should do something we'll actually remember from this trip, something stupid." Lina raised an eyebrow. Define stupid. His grin was the first she'd seen in a while, a midnight swim. She shook her head, incredulous, smiling despite herself. "Sam, it's going to be freezing." "That's the point," he said. "We'll never forget it. One lake each. You take Tislit, I'll take Isli." Lina studied him for a moment, her eyes catching the first shimmer of stars above, gleaming with a playfulness she hadn't felt in months. Then she raised her cup and clinked it against his. "All right," she said. "Midnight swim it is. Deal." The moon rose late, silvering the valley in pale light. The air was colder now, their breath hanging in clouds as they slipped from the warmth of their blankets. The lake stretched before them, still and black, waiting. Sam carried a lantern down to the edge with Lina, their steps crunching softly on the frost-tipped grass. At the shoreline, he kissed her quickly, then pulled back with a grin. "You take Tislit, I'll go to Isli," he said, "but we go in together." "Deal," she replied, tugging her phone from her pocket. "Video call, just to sync, otherwise you'll cheat." Minutes later, he was across the way at Isli, her pale outline visible in the distance. His phone buzzed, and her face lit the screen, eyes wide, hair caught by the moonlight, her breath quick with both cold and laughter. "Ready?" she asked. He smirked. "Define ready." She rolled her eyes. "On three. 1, 2, 3. They dropped their blankets, tossed their phones onto the rocks, and plunged into the water at the same time. The cold was brutal, biting through skin to bone, shocking the breath from their lungs. Sam surfaced with a gasp, teeth clenching. Across the distance, Lina shrieked a laugh that cracked into a squeal. But then the laughter faded. The water clung heavier than it should have, as if it thickened around their bodies, slowing every movement. Sam blinked through droplets, the world around him muffled, unreal. On the shore, their phones still glowed faintly where they had fallen. Sam could hear her voice through the small speaker, except she wasn't laughing anymore. She was whispering, and when he opened his mouth, his own voice answered. Not in English, not in any language he knew, but the words matched hers, perfectly. They stumbled back to shore, gasping, their bodies shaking from the cold. The phones lay where they had tossed them, screens still lit, faintly recording the dark. Neither of them reached for them. Sam dropped onto the rocks, chest heaving, the taste of iron on his tongue. Lina wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, her hair dripping down her back, her lips trembling too hard to speak. And yet, she spoke. Not in her own words, not in her own voice. The syllables were foreign, harsh and fluid at once, shaped by a tongue she didn't have. Sam froze. His head snapped toward her, because the same words were spilling from his mouth. They stared at each other, eyes wide, whispering in perfect unison. Words they did not understand, a language neither had ever learned. The sound died suddenly, like a candle blown out. Silence returned, heavy and complete. Lina pressed her hands to her mouth. "Sam, what was that?" But he couldn't answer. His own lips still tingled, as if they remembered the shapes of the words even as his mind rejected them. That night, they dreamed the same dream. Of a wedding that never happened, of fires burning in the distance, of two faces they didn't know, pressed close in grief, whispering promises that turned into screams. They woke before dawn, breathless, their hands gripping each other's as if they'd been holding on for dear life in sleep. For the first time in years, they kissed without hesitation, not out of habit, not for comfort, but with an urgency that didn't feel entirely their own. The days that followed blurred strangely. They finished each other's sentences with ease. At first it was playful, then unsettling, because the words weren't theirs. Sometimes whole phrases slipped out in that same unfamiliar language. They touched more, spoke less. Nights were consumed with a passion that frightened them in its intensity. It was as though they had been hollow for years, and something had rushed in to fill them. But in quieter moments, when one of them laughed, or when their eyes locked for too long, there was something foreign there, a flicker, a presence watching through them, as if the lakes themselves had risen into their skin. They had wanted to find each other again, and they had. But it wasn't only their love. When they returned from the mountains, their friends noticed first. Not in obvious ways, not at once, but over dinners, in passing conversations, in the smallest of moments. Sam and Lina spoke less, yet seemed more in sync than ever. Sometimes they didn't need to finish sentences at all. A glance was enough. And when they did speak, a strange cadence slipped through their words, as if another rhythm guided their voices. One night, at a gathering, Lina laughed at a joke no one else had heard. The room fell quiet. Her laugh was warm, but it wasn't hers. It was richer, older. A stranger's sound spilling from familiar lips. Sam placed a hand on her shoulder, and without looking, she reached to cover it. The gesture practiced, ancient, far beyond their years together. No one said anything, but they all felt it. At home, the dreams returned. Night after night, they found themselves walking hand in hand across barren fields, watching fires burn across hillsides, pressing their foreheads together in desperate vows of forever. And when they woke, the sheets twisted and damp, their eyes searched for each other not with comfort, but with need. A need that wasn't only theirs. A few months later, over dinner at Lina's parents' house, her mother leaned back and studied them both. "You seem different," she said softly. "Closer, like something's changed between you." Lina smiled, squeezing Sam's hand. "It has," she said simply. Sam answered politely, his hand resting in Lina's. "We needed time away. That's all." Her mother didn't press. Parents notice things, but not all questions need answers. No one else knew what had happened at the lakes. No one knew they had swum at midnight, that they had whispered words in a language neither of them had learned. But those who saw them afterward agreed. Sam and Lina were not the same as before. There was something deeper in their eyes, something accentuated by longing and loss, an older story running beneath their skin, a love once forbidden, now suddenly within reach. Two souls who had longed for centuries, finally given flesh and voice. Sam and Lina had wanted to find each other again, and they had. But it wasn't only their love. They say the waters of Isli and Tislit still wait, that when lovers step into them, the old souls rise again. And if you listen closely, on nights when the moon is high, you'll hear two voices speaking in unison, in a language no one remembers, except the lakes.